Hello, BookTube. I'm here to do a tag. It's the Future Classics book tag. This one was made by Eric Karl Anderson. Very thoughtful and really interesting fellow to watch, and I really encourage you to follow the link to his channel, see his original tag, and watch all his videos because he's got some wonderful, really thoughtful things to say about books. So with the Future Classics book tag, it's the kind of the idea is what you think we will still be reading in 50 years time. So 2068 when I'll be 100 and, obviously still just in perfect health and reading books and all that. And I can look back on this and go, wow, that guy's got terrible lighting. So I'm going to take this from the spirit of, I know I'm going to get it wrong. If there's one thing that I can see by looking at some of the lists that I've gone through, like the kind of going through awards lists and just looking at stuff, it's like, yeah, I'm going to be completely wrong. So I'm going to embrace being wrong while still being sincerely, this is what I love or what I think are going to be classics in 50 years time. So yes, forcefully wrong. So number one, pick an established classic that you think will still be relevant in the future. So I split it up into a couple. First is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because I think in 50 years' time, people will still be so amazingly primitive that they'll think digital watches are a good idea. Next one is, this one's probably more actual classic, is the Hobbit, because it's the start of fantasy, and I think that it was a children's book was the right entry point actually for fantasy, and I think it's just so significant that way that in 50 years time people will you'll be forced to contend with it, and it's magic and it's silliness at the same time, and I think that's essential things to fantasy. And it's we're in a grimdark period, but we got to remember the play, the nonsense, the fantasy part, I think is a part of the undeniable power. And finally, just to get a little lit, The Golden Notebook, Doris Lessing, a book that just made it so gloriously wonderful to be sad. This book made me very sad, and I just loved every moment of it. And so that's my personal classic, 50 years time. Next question. Pick a recent book which you feel has gone under the radar. And this is one where it's funny because the author most certainly has not gone under the radar, but I think the book has, which is Beyond Black by Hilary Mantel. And it's a book of kind of it's almost like it's a ghost story. It's a book about a clairvoyant who the problem is that she actually can see ghosts, and that this is like a really nasty, horrible world of the dead that is bothering her, and it's also tied up with like sort of abuse as a child. It's a kind of just post-war, it's in post-war England, which is one of these interesting times of my parents both emigrated from the UK, that post-war grimy period. So I think it's post-war, but it's got that feel of just like malaise, and escaping that. And there's just the thing of like, all the war dead, and all the people wanting to find answers for that. It's interesting. One of those things of a lot of the kind of when does a lot of spiritualism come up into the world? It's like we had the great mass slaughters of World War I and World War II, and for me, this is a far superior book than Wolf Hall. Maybe it's because I'm not into historical fiction, but this to me was super powerful, super compressed into one book. Whereas I read Wolf Hall and it didn't feel like a full book to me. Maybe it was. It was okay, but to me, Beyond Black is the classic Hilary Mantel, and since she's such a great writer, this would be the book that I would think that actually will still be read in 50 years' time. Whereas I don't know where her historical novels will be, whether they'll actually rise or fall. That's one of those interesting things of, things ride so high for a certain amount of time and then they just sort of die away and stuff like that. So speaking of recent as again, pick a title that won one. Pick a title that won. Pick a title that won one of your favorite book prizes recently. Which do you think will still be lauded in 50 years' time? For that, I picked. Oh, let's see now. I picked Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, which was 2005, which I guess is recent. I mean, as classics go, I think that's pretty darn recent. Yeah, yeah. I think it's a fairly well-known book around BookTube. It's got that combination of Jane Austen and fantasy of kind of Regency, kind of that era, and it was one of these books that I felt like I really got lost into, immersed into. Yeah, I can see why this is one of these books where she doesn't crank one out every year. She did that one, and I'm not quite sure if she's done much. I think there was like some short stories or stuff like that, who may have even been written before this. But yeah, that would most definitely be my choice for something. And that one won the Hugo Award and the World Fantasy Award. Not that I really put much stock in these things. It was kind of funny going through the list. It's like, yeah, Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. That lost I think it lost a couple of things to Orson Scott Card's Speaker for the Dead, which Speaker for the Dead, regardless of how you think of Orson Scott Card, is a good book, but obviously Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale is one of these books that it's a classic that I've read, and I don't think I'd read again, but I can see why it's such a relevant book and might still echo down more for 50 years. So it's funny how something loses all the awards, but yes, yet that's the book that ends up enduring, even though that it wasn't everybody's favorite at the time. As time goes by, it just gains that power more and more. So that's the problem with book prizes, maybe. Number 4, pick a recent book you haven't read yet, but which you think might become a classic based on reputation alone. So that's reviews, responses, and Goodreads, booktube recommendations. And I have to say, a lot of times when I'm just picking my reading, it's like, oh, this book is super hyped. But there's plenty of other books to read, so I'll just wait. And it's interesting because you just wait, and like a lot of these super hype books, a year or two goes by, and suddenly they just drop out of the conversation, and you go, well, I guess I didn't need to read that because it was super big for a couple of years, and then it just evaporates. So some of the books that where is it? Oh, it's over there. I considered Donna Tartt's Secret History, which actually appears in my book 112 my 112 tag video as a top pick. So I think that might be one that I might try, just because this is a book that has come up in a lot of conversations as one maybe I should try. It's funny, this and also If on a Winter's Night, A Traveler by Italo Calvino is another one that I might consider as a one of these books that's continually hear about. Actually, it's funny, both books sound like very kind of Marmite books, as like, are they books that are people either really like or they really bounced off of, but they seem to continually get talked to. And like, Calvino's book is 1979 and people are still talking about it. Donna Tartt is 1992, which for an oldster like me seems like just yesterday, but actually no, that's been a bit of time too. So those are two books that seem to be lasting for a bit, so maybe they'd be worth trying, or might turn out to be books that are going to last 50 years or something like that. And then the final question, number 5, is pick a favorite book that you want to save for your grandchildren, or your maybe grandnieces and grandnephews, or friends' grandchildren, to read in 50 years' time. So I think for this, it came down to 2 books for me. Either Alan Mendelsohn, The Boy from Mars by Daniel Pinkwater, which is, it's published in 1970, and it was it's one of those books that I think it feels like it captures my childhood in a way. Of yeah, it's just got a kind of a good surrealness to it. The guy, the main character, not Alan Mendelsohn, but his friend, has kind of an unhappy home life. Kind of you get kind of, there's that discomfort of growing up, which I really identified with as a child. I think I finally went with this is a terrible cover, but it's Harriet the Spy by Louise Fitzhugh. Louise Fitzhugh. I want to say Fitzgerald, by Louise Fitzhugh, which is 1964. Actually, the one good thing that this book has is, even though it's got the atrocious, I think it's like a TV movie version of Harriet the Spy, within the book, it does actually have the author's original illustrations. That why they couldn't put that on the cover of the book, I don't know. But Harriet the Spy, which is, it's the Harriet, and she's this little girl who also has kind of messed up childhood. There's difficulties in the family. When I grow up, I'm going to find out everything about everybody and put it all in a book. So writes Harriet M. Welsh, who is determined to grow up and be a famous author. In the meantime, she practices by following a regular spy route each day and writing down everything she sees in her secret notebook. Then one morning, Harriet's life is turned upside down. Her classmates find her spy notebook and read it out loud. Harriet is in big trouble. The other sixth graders are stealing her tomato sandwiches, forming a spy catcher club, and writing notes of their own, all about Harriet. Yeah. It's a great book about kind of the inner life of this girl, of her literary kind of things, and also just her kind of like her snoopiness, her wanting to look into other people's lives, which I think is like what all fiction is about. And just that Harriet isn't that pleasant of a kid, which I really appreciate. As you get, especially at this point, this was written in 1964. It's like you get all these kind of, oh, they're a wonderful kid. I mean, even now, like all the main characters have to be likable. It's like this book had a character that didn't have to be likable at all times, and as such was way more someone I could identify with, even as a little crappy little boy growing up. So yeah, I think Harriet the Spy would be something that I would want kids in 50 years to read and hopefully still identify with, and still be writing down in their secret notebook all the stuff, and still having troubles with all their things. So yes, that is the classics book tag, the future classics book tag, which I 50, 100-year-old self is probably going to look back and laugh and have to make a response video to this. So I tag myself in 50 years time to tell me everything I got wrong, and be zooming around in his hoverboard and all that sort of stuff, and I don't know, something like that. I hope that was slightly entertaining. More videos later. Oh, and whoever wants to do this tag should do this tag because it's fun. And yes, make sure you get everything wrong. Everything completely wrong in your own freaking way. Bye for now.